If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mind Shock. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and today we are finally taking a look at a complete and total debunking of Einstein's relativity in simple to understand terms by the legendary Run Z Cow. I have mentioned Run Z Cow's dismantling and debunking of Einstein's relativity in many podcasts regarding logic and physics and various different debates, and people have asked for a complete breakdown of this, and we are getting to that today. This is, I wouldn't call it revolutionary in the world of science and physics, but for those hopelessly indoctrinated into the cult of scientism, where they worship at the churches of relativity and special relativity, where they actually abandon all science, logic, and reason in order to keep the faith, they might find this very shocking and triggering. But for those that are in the know, I mean, it's not like Einstein's relativity was accepted in the beginning anyway. There were hundreds of scholars and scientists with different backgrounds and fields that even signed petitions against adopting relativity. And 100 years or so ago, I mean, a lot of people don't even know about the rivalry between the theories of Nikola Tesla, of which he has hundreds and hundreds of patents, which all work and were communicated on wireless technology stemming from his theories and experiments, and Einstein's relativity, of which we have zero. He had zero actual inventions that worked in accordance with his theories. Now, in the reification logical fallacy, a lot of scientism cultists and authority-worshipping cultists who can only regurgitate what they've been brainwashed with in indoctrination facilities, they can only say, oh, everything works with relativity. Or was it reverse engineered to make it look like it works when it actually doesn't? And I, of course, Bruce McGuire here on Mind Shock, the entire goal here is to bring logic and reason back to a world where it is quickly becoming extinct. So people knew from the get-go the fraud of relativity. I mean, there's, of course, the hoax of 1919. Now, this hoax, which a lot of people don't know about, I mean, I actually threw up a clip of this on Mind Shock from a longer podcast, but this is Eddington made up that he could somehow get eclipse data, and somehow that proves the fraud of relativity correct. Nobody double-checked anything. They just took the word of this guy, Eddington, in 1919. Einstein wins a Nobel Prize in physics for relativity off of the fraud. And Eddington didn't admit this fraud until, was it 27 or something, late 20s, where he said, oh, obviously no technology even exists to take the alleged eclipse data that Eddington somehow claimed magically proved relativity. I mean, this is all such obvious hoaxery, but those who worship at the altar of scientism just view this, just view it all as blasphemy and completely ignore everything while maintaining the faith and the religion of scientism, which currently hinges on relativity. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, find it interesting and informative, you can donate to our PayPal, help support the channel, help us get more mind-shocking content out there with logic and reason at the forefront in various subjects. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats for members only. Help support the channel that way. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You can also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. If you're not getting notifications, just make sure you comment more on all of the podcasts. Seems to be YouTube's algorithm will only give you notifications if you comment a lot, regardless of whether you have notifications turned on. And, of course, subscribe to the channel. Spread the word of logic and reason. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. Just warning, if you don't want to have your Dunning-Kruger called out, make sure you understand basic logic, logical fallacies, and of course you're at least on a first grade English comprehension level, which many people are obviously not for anybody who's checked out the comment section. Okay, so let's jump right in here. let's do a quick background on who Run Z Cow is, because a lot of people don't even know who this guy is. So Run Z Cow is actually a gold medal winning academic Olympiad team leader and instructor, not just in physics, but in biology and chemistry as well. This guy dominates 3 fields in the academic Olympiad. He's a first place national winner in many different subjects and academic competitions. He was also, and he represented Team Canada in this academic Olympiad on numerous occasions. So this guy is clearly a very, very gifted academic who's not a quackademic, supposedly. He was smart enough to understand the basics of relativity and what a fraud it is. So this is not some random nobody in their mom's basement like the scientism cultists pretend. I mean, this is a highly credentialed. He actually scored in the not just the 99th percentile. He scored in the 99.9 percentile on the MCATs, the Medical College Admissions Test. So, and he's now currently an instructor. So this guy's a bunch of degrees from different universities, Ivy League universities, in multiple different subjects, and also an academic Olympiad gold medalist, 2 golds and a silver, in 3 different subjects, biology, chemistry, and of course what we're talking about today, physics. So clearly, this is not some random nobody. He published a paper, Einstein's Relativity, the Great Mistake, and he also released these videos on YouTube that we're going over. They were actually removed from YouTube, but recently a commenter on the Mindshock podcast actually found a re-upload, so it is still alive, and I'll be going over it now. And I may have overstated how simple the video is. There's a few concepts for those unfamiliar with relativity and physics and the basic scientific method. It might come across as slightly dense. Now, of course, I've also mentioned Oleg D. Jeffimenko, a mathematician, one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, who completely demolishes Einstein's relativity with pure math. But the math is really, really dense. So we're not going to be getting into Jeffimenko's equations and his complete obliteration of Einstein and relativity, because that's a little bit dense. But Run Z Cow is a lot more easily digestible. So let's get right into it.
Hello there. Today I, Ranzi Cao, and that's Ci as in Hertz, Cao. And yes, I have a 2-part first name. I will prove to you today that Einstein's relativity is a great mistake. That he is irrevocably, irreparably wrong. Now, before I begin, I must note that I only thought of very few more steps than Einstein did. But of course, we all know that sometimes great breakthroughs come from very small steps. Einstein did a good job. He took Maxwell's equations and he merged them with the mechanics that they knew of at the time. Okay, that's good. The problem with having something that's mathematically apparently sound is the not so minor fact that in theory and reality are the same. Reality kindly disagrees.
So, pretty nice guy off the bat. He's giving Einstein some props, undeserved props, of course. But, again, the purpose of all of this is to see how easy the scientism cultists, how gullible and easy they fall for anything that comes from authorities, as if they can't comprehend that humans are fallible. Run Z Cow here has enough of a brain to think for himself, and I'm going to break this down and simplify it as much as possible, so we're not necessarily going to be going point by point in expecting everybody to understand every word Run Z Cow says. I may have slightly overstated that he breaks it down to like a 3rd or 5th grade level. I mean, maybe it's a little bit more of an 8th or 9th grade level. But I'm going to break it down even simpler, and just the overall gist of it here is that assumptions were made. And when you don't, in the world of science, you need to actually prove things. You don't just assume and stack assumptions and then call blasphemy. How dare anybody question the assumptions? Now, a lot of things these gullible goof scientism cultists do is they said, oh, well, if he was wrong, somebody would have noticed it. But the thing about the quackademic establishment, especially the past 100 years, especially in physics, but in all areas really, nobody actually double checks the foundation, the bedrock of what everything is built on. So if it's like a house of cards, if that bottom layer is false, everything built on top of it is false. But here we have a rare breed in Run Z Cow who actually has the mental wherewithal to say, wait a second, is this actually sound? So let's continue examining.
Well, you will be shown exactly how reality disagrees with him. Now, we must note that Einstein was a good scientist. He was brave. He dared to come out and speak and say that, oh yes, we must have relativity. Yeah, the principle of relativity is of course correct. It was later on that he made his mistakes.
So right here, of course, Run Z Cow is part of the establishment to a certain extent. Because if he's claiming, of course, mass attracts mass, and he's not really purporting, as far as I know, electromagnetism and Tesla's theories and all of that. He's not questioning the mass attraction of mass. But that's not the point here. The point here is how desperately the scientism cultists cling to relativity like it's their Bible. And Run Z Cow is really good at dismantling that, regardless of all the other factors and how it ties into the greater scheme of things. That's not what this is about. This is about the specifics and the math, and a guy who actually has the mental wherewithal to not worship at the altar of relativity and instead point out the bleeding obvious.
But the point is, he was very respectable. Of course, then, if there is a mistake, then correcting it must also be respectable. It has been 110 years since he created his special relativity and essentially paved the way for his so-called general relativity. In early 2015, I proved that Einstein's relativity must be wrong. So I sent my papers to a bunch of major journals and some famous physicists, and these were the titles that I used. This one has since been renamed to match this presentation, which is The Great Mistake, relativity. Now, in this one, I proved that relativity was wrong. In the second paper, Surpassing the Speed of Light, which I actually wrote earlier, I demonstrated exactly why modern accelerators, by design, even if the speed of light is not a speed limit, and we will show why it is not, cannot possibly accelerate a particle to over the speed of light. Now, naturally, nobody wanted to rock the boat.
So that's another important principle that Run Z Cow is bringing forward. Because the status quo is a powerful thing. I mean, think about it anywhere. I mean, even in some kind of, if you work at McDonald's or whatever, if you want to redo their system, even if it's 1,000,000 times better, is the manager really going to listen to you? I mean, is head of corporate really going to say, wait a second, this guy's onto something if you figured out some kind of new method? Now, maybe, rarely, if you know the right people, you get enough support, you can possibly get something done. But if all you have is the pure logic and reason and truth, nobody wants to double check it. Nobody wants to change anything. I mean, think about it. I'm going to bring up Upton Sinclair again in his famous quote. It's very difficult to get a man to understand something which his paycheck depends on him not understanding. So all these goofs got it wrong the whole time. And now, of course, again, there were dissenters. There were plenty of scientists. There's over 100, possibly over 1,000, that have spoken out and pointed out the bleeding obvious of the fraud of relativity. But they were, of course, ignored, ushered to the sidelines, etc., to maintain status quo. So nobody wanting to rock the boat, that's a very important point, because they were unwilling to even have a scientific discussion with this man, this academic scholar, this gold medalist of academic Olympiads. Nobody would give him the time of day. I mean, that's very telling. to the cult of scientism. It's very easy to see who the real scientists are and who the scientism cultists, the scientism priests are, who are just practicing their religion of scientism with no regard for actual real science, adhering to the scientific method and the truth of reality. So that's a very important point brought forth here by Runzi Cao.
Because, well, a lot of them depended on this boat staying afloat to get paid.
And he really summarized Upton Sinclair's principle here. Not to mention, how bad does it make everybody look? I mean, obviously the gullible goof masses, as soon as there's a big change, whether it's from the Earth being flat to the Earth being a globe, whichever direction you're going, whatever the real truth is, that's not the point of this podcast. Or, you know, whether you're going from one particular theory to relativity and then to a different theory, all the gullible goof masses, they always hallucinate in some kind of narcissistic state that, yeah, people made mistakes in the past, but now all the experts, the authorities, all of the institutions and Ivy League universities, they could never be wrong now. I mean, maybe in the past they were wrong about things, but now they can't be wrong. So this level of goofery in the scientism cult perfectly illustrated here by Runzi Cao, because if they're this wrong about what they've been preaching at institutions, I mean, this is the bedrock of modern physics. Einstein's relativity fraud, that's the bedrock which everyone hallucinates is true and builds on top of like a house of cards. So if it turns out it's not true and it's not even close, again, another win for the conspiracy theorists. I mean, anybody keeping track now past couple years? I mean, it's a complete blowout. But anyway, how bad does that make mainstream establishment look? I mean, it's kind of like the same thing with flat Earth. Again, I do not allege any shape of the Earth, but if it does turn out that the Earth really is flat and flat Earth is true, I mean, nobody would even trust any kind of academic establishments ever again, so they can't give up their power. So from their side, it's not about the truth, it's about maintaining status quo. That's all it's really about. But let's continue here.
I am the first and to date only person who has managed to use science and math to prove that Einstein must be wrong.
Well, a little bit, got a little bit of an ego there, Runzi Cao. I mean, obviously Oleg D. Jeffomenko proved this much earlier, decades ago, and then, of course, Nikola Tesla and many other scientists. I mean, I don't know if they actually went down into the nitty-gritty. Jeffomenko did. So Jeffomenko did it before Runzi Cao with pure math. I'm not sure. I guess if he's talking about general scientific principles and not just pure math, maybe he really was the first, but I mean, he didn't drop Jeffomenko's name. It's curious. I mean, he would have to know about Jeffomenko, but anyway, let's continue.
I expected, of course, to take quite a long time for relativity to leave the textbooks. Consider geocentrism. The first person to propose that, no, the sun does not go around the earth, it's the other way around. The first person to do this was a little bit after Democritus. You might be thinking, who is Democritus? He was a guy who proposed the atom. And he is a guy who essentially gave the atom its current name.
Allegedly. And then, of course, Runzi Cao, he does seem to be partially in the cult of scientism. Of course, I don't know if he actually investigated any of these other claims, geocentrism, heliocentrism. It seems like he didn't actually investigate those. Whereas with relativity, he specifically investigated and debunked it. So who knows if he has the mental strength to go even further against the establishment. I mean, everyone's got their lines in the sand. I mean, this guy's an academic. He's an academic instructor. So if he came out, if flat Earth is true, and I'm not alleging it is, or if it's a globe Earth geocentric universe, if he just came out and said that could be deemed damaging to his credibility. So he might only be willing to go so far. But the point of this, of course, is just dismantling relativity. So let's continue.
So, Democritus was sometime around the 4th century BC. The first guy to propose heliocentrism was around the 3rd century BC. It was not until the 1700s CE, yes, that's the term these days, 1700 CE until heliocentrism was actually broadly hailed as fact. So this is how long? 2,000 years. Hopefully, it will not take 2,000 years for relativity to leave the history books, because at our current rate, I don't think humanity can last 2,000 years without discovering faster than light travel. So, there's always a disclaimer. Whenever you learn about this guy's relativity, there's always a disclaimer in the textbooks, and this disclaimer is valid. Relativity has never been proven wrong.
It's actually been proven wrong many, many times, including Jeff Fomenko with pure math. But maybe, I guess he doesn't know about Jeff Fomenko. Oh, okay.
Well, until my proof. But anyway, this disclaimer is perfectly valid. Why? For the simple reason that in science, you cannot really prove a theory right. You can only prove it to not be wrong at present. However, the fact that you haven't proved it wrong yet, well, up until my proof, does not mean it is right. Now, this photo should be very familiar to anybody who is a fan of Einstein. And this is from 1919. Arthur Eddington's expedition to around the equator, just south of Africa.
I wonder if he's even aware that Eddington admitted to this fraud. That'd be curious. Let's find out.
Just south of West Africa. And he took this photo of a solar eclipse. And they used this opportunity to look at the stars. Now, these stars, because the sun is deflecting their light, they look to be further out from the sun than they actually are. So when they calculated these deflections, Newton's mechanics would have given a deflection of 0.75 arc seconds. Now, 1 arc second, so you know that there's 360 degrees of arc in a circle, right? So 1 degree is 60 minutes. 1 minute is 60 seconds of arc. So Newton's calculations would have given a deflection that was 1 over 4,800 of a degree. Einstein's calculations was a little over twice of that. Now, even disregarding for now the question of whether or not glass in 1919 was actually good enough to produce this sort of resolution, even disregarding that, we will demonstrate in a later presentation why there is a problem with this. After 1919, Sir Arthur Eddington, who had been a long-time supporter of Einstein, he decided to go and give a talk. And after the talk, a professor at the university he was speaking at supposedly asked him a question of, "Sir Eddington, what do you think of the claim that only 3 people really understand relativity?" Eddington's response was pretty much what you would expect, given the fact that Einstein sounded like a Emperor's New Clothes scam. So the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, I hope you're reasonably familiar with it. But Einstein's claim was that, oh, it's fine if only a few scientists can understand me. What does a few scientists mean? He means, oh, it's fine if only the smartest scientists could understand me. Well, do you really think somebody's going to stand up and say, no, you are wrong? Well, quite a few people actually did. But most of people decided to wait and see if there was any proof that he didn't seem to be wrong at the time. So after Eddington's expedition, Eddington was actually proud enough to claim that, oh, only me and Einstein are special enough to understand his relativity.
I mean, this is a really good story, too. It really does expose the fraud that scientism is, because, of course, the scientific method, if you can't demonstrate something to be true with clear, dependent, independent variables and controls, then you're just engaging in a form of religion or just random theories, which, of course, might have absolutely zero basis in reality, and hallucinating that they have a basis in reality and that they're just too complex or whatever nonsense. That's, of course, the main tenet of the cult of scientism.
So everybody else decided to pile onto the bandwagon by claiming that, oh yes, relativity is correct, we always believe so. This probably sounds like elementary school bandwagoning to you, or cliques, but, well, these things happen.
That's all I can say. These things happen. I mean, most so-called experts and authorities, they really are just mindless goofs. They never actually checked anything. They're just expert regurgitators, memorizers and regurgitators. That's how the indoctrination facility school system works. Nobody's allowed to question, and if you do question, you're chastised. I mean, look, people. How many people out there have actually posted a rebuttal of Run Z Cow?
This bending of light would also have been predicted by Newtonian mechanics, but to a different magnitude. This diagram shows how a solar eclipse works. So clearly, when starlight is going around the sun, yeah, okay, it gets bent. We will demonstrate using this diagram in a later presentation why Newtonian calculations were not that far off compared to what they thought. So this guy is, you may and probably should have guessed that he is Sir Isaac Newton, given that we've been talking about Newtonian mechanics. And we've already seen that Einstein does not look like this. So, given the fact that this is an oil painting, even if we don't remember when Newton died, it's pretty easy to conclude that he must have died before Einstein's time. So he was no longer around to defend himself, or defend his theories, or modernize them even. Now, yes, Weberian electric theory was overtaken, but Maxwell was also just an approximation in the end. There are other factors that they don't seem to have contemplated that we will discuss in a later presentation. Einstein based his relativity on two postulates. The first one is not up for dispute. The principle of relativity states that every inertial frame is equally valid. This is not disputable. The second one is that the speed of light is constant when observed from any inertial frame, regardless of the speed of the frame or the speed of the emitter of the light.
So, is everybody following so far? I mean, it's not that complicated. So, obviously, this first postulate, pretty easy to understand. That's why Einstein himself said that it would be impossible to do any experiment to tell whether the Earth is moving or everything else is moving because of this frame. Now, the second postulate, of course, I mean, it kind of seems ludicrous just on the surface, but let's not fall for appeal to incredulity logic fallacies. Let's see what tests prove or disprove this.
Or velocity. Fine. This is where his problem is. This will be proven to be very much wrong very, very soon. Why? Because logically, we will demonstrate that it simply does not match up with itself. Now, our first experiment is on the subject of deconstructing Einstein's simultaneity. Alright, so here, this is what simultaneity looks like in textbooks, or Einstein's idea of simultaneity. So his idea is that when O and O prime match up in position, two lightning bolts strike the ends of the car. So it makes two scorch marks. The person in the car sees the light from in front before the light from behind. They specifically say that, oh, this is not necessarily simultaneous. There is one problem with this. When the car is moving, there is one moment, and only one moment, in the car's frame where it observes that O and O prime are lined up. From the station's frame, or the track's frame, they also observe one and only one moment where O and O prime are lined up. What does this say? This says that those two moments must be the same moment, because there is only one moment where they line up. So, if at this moment these two lightning bolts strike the ends of the car, they must have done so simultaneously in both frames. Because it's the same moment. Location correlates to time. And therefore, one point in location correlates to one point in time in this case. Here. The funny thing about this is that it actually runs straight into Einstein's own second postulate, and he doesn't even realize it.
Is everybody following so far? I mean, it's relatively simple. I mean, it's not like Jeffermenko's equations where it's just so much pure math and complicated equations. It's difficult to follow, difficult to relate how it references something else, and then keeping them all in mind when trying to digest it all in reference to other equations and what it does or doesn't prove. So again, Jeffermenko, quite dense, very, very dense. But Runzike out here, I mean, pretty simple explanation, is it not? He's explaining what relativity alleges, and he's explaining what the issue is, which he's going to continue explaining here. So hopefully everybody's following along here. I mean, I'll try to dumb down as much as possible as necessary because it's going to get a little bit more complicated. But let's see what he says.
So he says that he runs into the signal from in front before the signal from behind catches him. Wait a second. All inertial frames are equally valid. Why are you telling us that your light is propagating in the frame of the tracks instead of propagating in the frame of the car?
So again, great question. If all frames are equally valid, why are you ignoring one frame? And again, this isn't rocket science. It's very simple to understand. But the problem with scientism cultists, these clueless goofs, refuse to re-examine this religion of relativity to see if the tenets actually hold up. But Runzike out here, he's got the modicum of common sense required to say, wait a second.
In the frame of the car, since there was one moment when these two lined up, where the lights happened, then, given that it's the same distance to the middle, and they occurred at the same moment, and they move at the same speed, c, relative to all frames, as he says, then they should meet at O prime at the same time as they meet at O. Now you might realize something. The wave front of the light clearly hits O before it hits O prime. Thus, we will demonstrate very simply, well, we pretty much have already demonstrated, that his second postulate must be wrong. But we will demonstrate it a little bit further. If you are not already laughing at this point, then consider the fact that Einstein's idea of simultaneity and of something happening or not versus his observations is essentially that, oh, it didn't happen, therefore, well, I mean, I didn't feel it happen, so therefore it didn't happen.
I mean, come on, children can understand this basic explanation. I mean, I would think, obviously there's allegedly functioning adults out there that probably don't understand these very, very simple principles and observations. Nobody really fact-checked Einstein that took it as gospel. But the thing about simplicity, because going back to that base layer of the house of cards, it's not necessarily a complicated ordeal. You're just double-checking the base layer, the foundation. Now, you double-check the foundation, and it just doesn't hold up. I mean, let's continue.
I'm pretty sure we figured out that this is false when we were still playing peekaboo with our parents. So Einstein seems to have skipped this class for whatever reason. Perhaps he was too busy doing something else.
What a polite way of saying that.
So, let's approach this simultaneity problem from a middle school perspective, which, by the way, is exactly what Einstein did. So, this object, well, this observer, sets out from this point at speed 0.2 y. This observer sets out at speed y, and this observer sets out at speed y, velocity minus y. So what happens? Well, this observer will catch up 1/4 of the way over here. This makes sense. It travels 5/4, and this one travels 1/4, 1 to 5. And these two meet somewhere before this point. Yes. Does this sound like Einstein's simultaneity yet? Well, it does, and it should. So here are the calculations. You should feel free to scroll through them quickly, or we will scroll through them quickly, and you are free to pause at any time. Now, as we see, all these calculations are reasonable. So, the moving observer will end up seeing the same thing. When the light catches up to him, he will see the same as the stationary observer whose location exactly corresponds to him.
So again, this is why nobody needs to obsess with the exact calculations and equations. We're just seeing here whether the principles line up. Is this valid on the surface? Because if it's not valid, it doesn't matter what the exact calculations are. As I bring up the example of counting unicorns, too. I mean, you can count unicorns perfectly, but that doesn't mean it's a unicorn, and that doesn't mean it proves what you're trying to allege it proves. So, again, we're not going to focus specifically on the exact equations. They might be difficult for some. That's not the point here. The point here, is it valid in the first place?
Well, or when the other observer catches up to him. Let's not say that it's light for now. That would be university level, which we will do in a moment. The other observer catches him at a point where he ends up meeting the other observer at the same time that the person on the ground at his position meets the other observer. This makes sense. Now, both the observers coming from the ends meet in the middle. Yeah, that makes sense. So they arrive at the middle simultaneously. And they do not encounter the moving observer simultaneously. So, Einstein's simultaneity, which does not consider locations and how locations correspond to time, is meaningless.
Did everybody get that? I mean, it's a simple principle. It's very, very simple concept. So obsessing over the exact equations in math, you could do that. Jeff Amenko went all the way with that, completely dismantling relativity with pure math, how it doesn't add up anyway. But you don't even have to do that to have a general sense of how BUNK relativity is.
Now, if we are doing this at university level, all we have to do is set the speeds to some fraction of c. As we can see, clearly O3 and O2 will still meet at this middle. And O1 prime will say that, oh, they occurred at the same time. O1, if he is Einstein, he will insist that they didn't occur at the same time because he met the signal from in front first. Whoa. What are you doing? You know that those two set out when O1 and O1 prime were lined up. That's one moment in time. So that you know that they set out when they were the same distance from you. Even with Einstein's idea of length contraction, that only depends on the relative speed of the frames, not the velocity. Which means that this would be contracted the same as this, and they would still be the same distance away. And therefore, the light should take the same time to reach him. But that is not what Einstein says. Einstein says, you see the light coming from in front first. If Einstein were to be riding a bicycle with a very long pole with two firecrackers at either end, and he has an electric trigger with the same length of wire, so the same time, for both firecrackers, and he presses the trigger, he would insist that the firecracker in front went off first, based on the sound reaching him first.
Okay, did everybody understand that example? I mean, this guy's really good at explaining to children, basically. I mean, this is a very, very simple explanation. Is there anyone out there who does not understand this? And how it doesn't correspond to reality?
This is not what his second postulate says. Now, for an animated demonstration, let's take a look at this. Alright, so for an animated demonstration, it looks something like this. So clearly they met here at the same time. And these two were discovered by O2 prime at the same time. Well, there's no basis for Einstein's simultaneity here. And this also destroys his own second postulate. So, we can extend this is the text of our problem. We will scroll through this fairly quickly. And these are the same observations we made earlier, essentially. So we won't spend too much time on it. The point was that in the end, if we strictly enforce Einstein's second postulate, his own simultaneity must be wrong. And there are also other implications that we will very soon discuss. So if his simultaneity, his perception of time, is wrong, and by the way, his simultaneity actually made up the basis of his relativity in terms of perception of time versus reality of time.
I.e., that first layer of the house of cards.
So if his simultaneity, without counting for location first, is wrong, then we must conclude that time dilation, which his simultaneity leads to, will also end up being shown to be impossible. Alright. Here, we have a slightly longer track. We have a train, or some type of vehicle. So there is an observer inside. There are observers outside as well. How do we know that these two pulses are flashing at equal intervals in their own frame? Well, just look at the pulse fronts. So these two pulsars are giving off pulses of light, and they meet at the middle. So they are flashing in synchrony, simultaneously.
Alright, so this is a slightly more complicated example, but is everybody following so far? I mean, he's still explaining it rather well.
So what about this observer on the vehicle? What does he see? Well, this is 0.5 c, half of light speed. So this distance here is equal to ct, t being the interval of flash. And how long will this vehicle take to get here? Well, it takes 2t, right? Because half the speed of light, whereas the pulses propagate at the speed of light. And remember that because position correlates to time, we can define the flashers as giving off one flash when he is here, giving off one flash when he is halfway between, giving off a flash here, giving off a flash here, here, and so on. So, this is the problem in text. Please pause if you wish to review the text. Now, after time 2t, we arrive at this point. Okay, do the pulses look reasonable? Every observer observes the reasonable pulses? Yes, they do. What about this observer inside? What does he observe? He must observe the same thing as observer D, or observer O1 does. So, at 4t, he observes the same thing as observer O2 does. Now, this is not what Einstein would have said. Why? Well, consider the following. Now the vehicle begins to move, or maybe we unpause the progression of the events. Who knows? Whoa, how long did this wave, A4, earlier take to catch up with him? It took 2t. Whoa. Einstein says that it should only take the contracted length here, divided by the speed of time, to catch up to him.
So again, if the math was too complicated for you, let's throw the math out for a second. Einstein is making claim A when the reality is claim B, as you can clearly see in this diagram. So the exact numbers don't even matter. What matters is that Einstein has a certain claim which doesn't correspond to reality. So now we're just moving up those layers of the house of cards.
So, we know that all the pulses we recorded are reasonable, according to the distances. Then what does this say about when we use Einstein's approach? We conclude that the time needed for one pulse to catch up to the car started on pulse A3. So for pulse A4 to catch up to the car, it took time 2t in the external frame. Fine. This is alright. What about in the car's frame? Well, we know that according to Einstein's length contraction, the distance must be some multiple of CD, or some multiple of CT, if you prefer to use this. CT instead of CD line. So, this says that the time it takes for that light to catch up must be nt. Why? Because it must be a length of nct, where n is Einstein's contraction. What n is irrelevant. We will not calculate it because it is not important for our problem. Now, the conclusion for internal versus external time. By the way, according to Einstein, the ratio of internal time to external time should only depend on the relative speed of the two frames. This means that no matter which direction you are moving in, it should come out to be the same. Or at least which direction you are moving in as far as the calculation is concerned. So, here, this ratio is what we get for internal time to external time. Alright, this is fine. This isn't a problem. This is the problem. What about the light coming from in front? The light that comes from in front must spend times 3nt according to Einstein's speed of light postulate to catch up to the car, or to run into the car from the front. It takes time 2t from the external perspective. So the ratio of internal to external time must be 3n to 2. So essentially, Einstein is telling us that n over 2 is equal to 3n over 2. Therefore, Einstein's conclusion is 1 equals 3. So this is clearly not right.
That's one way to put it. So did everybody follow there? So again, doing the exact math isn't even relevant. Are the principles understood here by everybody listening? Einstein's claim is not representative of the result of the experiment, which anybody can replicate, of course. So, and he had the animation there to make it pretty clear to understand. I mean, is there anybody who's not following this? I mean, this is relatively clear. I mean, I don't know if I'd put it at 3 to 5th grade level, but it's clearly, 8 to 9th grade level. I mean, you don't have to be some kind of advanced physicist to understand these basics. I mean, these are very, very basic points.
It is mathematically true that 1 minus 1 over infinity, which is 0.9 repeating, is technically equal to 1. It is, however, not true that you can say that 1 equals 3. Therefore, we must see that time dilation due to the speed of light must be self-contradictory. It just runs into itself, in a sense, and flops. So, more importantly, this means the speed of light cannot be restricted to being constant in all inertial frames of reference.
I mean, is that not simple enough? I mean, obviously there's way more advanced principles that I don't know if he's going to go into here. Maybe he will. I haven't watched this in a while, so I just remember it was very, very basic to understand, as it is. I mean, he's making very, very clear easy to follow points that I think most children can probably understand these points.
So Einstein's second postulate has been shown to fail. So in our second experiment, we will resort to what is essentially an elementary school method of doing things, also known as Newtonian mechanics, or alternatively common sense.
I mean, this guy's funny in a weird way. I mean, yeah, common sense is not so common, as Thomas Paine had famously wrote. I mean, where's all the common sense from all these scientism cultists who can't even examine the base layer of the house of cards that is the fraud of relativity?
So Newtonian pursuit. Well, first let's count some pulses. So we saw earlier in our diagram that all the observers were seeing various pulses. And these pulses are reasonable according to their distances and the times. Now, Einstein's speed of light postulate, let's just say that for now we haven't proven him. Say we haven't proven him wrong. If we haven't, let's prove it in another way. Although we already showed it to be wrong.
Again, notice how he's pretty good at explaining things. This is also something the scientism cult doesn't really do. I mean, he's giving Einstein the benefit of the doubt here. He's saying, okay, well, this proves now, this other thing also proves, like, we're not hinging the whole argument on only a single experiment or a single point. Relativity can be completely dismantled from all sides, which is what this guy is doing, and, of course, Jeff Amenko did as well.
The speed of light postulate says the speed of light in vacuum has the same value c in all inertial frames. Alright, so let's prove it wrong again. These are some of the calculations we use. So we consider the distance between light pulses. This is each distance is what? Ct. C being the speed of light and t being the time interval, right? It is also equal to the length of CD in the diagram. So here, well, we list our calculations and we consider how O prime might use the light pulses to measure his own displacement when knowing how long each light pulse is in the external frame. So he's trying to measure his own displacement in the external frame by applying knowledge that he has of the external frame and these signals that he is getting. So, we saw very clearly from the animation and from the diagrams that when the vehicle moves from C to D, or D to E, or E to B for that matter, it moves a length of Ct in the external frame. Sure. What about when he's measuring from inside? Well, he sees 3 light pulses pass from in front. He sees 1 light pulse pass from behind him. And he also sees that the light from behind him has undergone 1 positional shift relative to him. This is slightly different from having a pulse pass by you. What does this actually mean? Well, we know that the pulse length is constant, right? And we know that that's because the speed of light is constant in the external frame, and according to Einstein, in all frames. And we also know that the time, that interval that they're flashing at, is the same. So, this is like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Except in this case, you're going 3 pulses forward and 2 pulses back. Or rather, 1 pulse back and you're sliding 1 pulse back, in a sense. So this matches the reality of a move from C to D. Why? Because your displacement ends up being 3CD minus CD minus CD equals CD. So
again, forget about those exact equations and just visualize the experiment. You're on the train, there are pulses, you know the distances, you know the timing. Everybody following? Let's continue.
This observation by the person inside the vehicle observes that he must move this far. This is the same as observed from outside.
I mean, there's a few other points here. I don't really want to focus on them too much, but I don't want to be remiss to not mention them because they are very, very important if you're actually conducting real science. There are, of course, unknown variables as well. There are obviously many, many undiscovered laws of physics and light, and then also the way the human brain processes light. Just because you know the timers are set to go off wherever they're going off, obviously there's some kind of delay. In like, again, obviously it's easier to in terms of like lightning or thunder, your perception of reality does not necessarily perfectly match actual reality. That's just something to keep in mind. I don't want to distract viewers here. I just wanted to mention that as an aside, because in real science you're not going to pretend and hallucinate. You have absolutely every single variable accounted for. But let's continue.
So if the object was not moving, it would be overtaken by an equal amount of waves from both sides. And they would calculate a positional shift of 0. 0 pulse gaps. And, well, 0 in general. What about the other people from outside? They also measure the vehicle as having a positional shift of 0. The result is that there is no need for length contraction here. It is irrelevant. And without a length contraction, do we even have relativity? No, we can't. And then let's think about Newtonian pursuits. Like, how does the light from in front, which is emitted at equal intervals as the light from behind, pass by him 3 times as fast? Why do we say it's at equal intervals? It's because if Einstein's length contraction is correct, and it's not, by the way, then this person, he notices that there's one moment when he passes point C, there's one moment when he passes midpoint CD, and there's one moment when he passes point D. And these are equal intervals, these 2 intervals here. Which means that if a light was emitted from both emitters when he was at point C, and one when he was at the midpoint, and one when he was at point D, well then, they're at equal intervals. Why then does the light pulse, does he encounter 3 wave fronts, so to speak, from in front, and only 1 from behind? Well then there must be a relative speed of light. In calculations, it looks like this. And we lead us to these conclusions. From this. This is not complicated. Of course, well, I mean, it's not complicated to any of us except Einstein, I guess. But the point is that since the light pulses from in front are at the same intervals as the light pulses from behind, and they're passing 3 times faster, then therefore they must be moving 3 times faster than the light pulses from behind. And what does this do to Einstein's second postulate? It blows it straight out of the water. This is once again a very similar issue to the 1 = 3 problem.
Again, don't get caught up in the exact equations. Just think about the principle. Just visualize the principles he's talking about. It's not that complicated. You don't have to do the equations, whatever. He already did them. And, I mean, they're not that complicated either. But regardless, let's not even go down the rabbit hole of doing the math all perfectly. Because does the concept make sense? Just on a basic, pure, common sense, logical evaluation, does it pass the sniff test? Because if nobody even reevaluated these base layers of the house of cards of relativity, and everybody's trying to nitpick that top layer, that doesn't even matter. Let's go back to the basics. Does this make any kind of sense? And Run zCal clearly demonstrates that it does not.
I know not how Einstein's mind works, but apparently he believes that 1 = 3. This evaluation here is important in the sense that using the speeds of light, the relative speeds of light that the person in the vehicle found, he can find his own speed relative to the tracks. And once he has found his speed or velocity, the terms here are interchangeable for now, for the simple reason that all our velocities that we're using are in the positive, except for the light that's coming from in front of him. So we know that the two light fronts are obviously closing the distance between them at 2c, relative to the frame that they're traveling on. Therefore, that's why we came up with the 3 to 1 must equal 1.5 to 0.5 thing. Do not think that relative to the other light, each light is only traveling at c. That is Einstein's mental shackle for you and attempt to trip you up from discovering that his theory is clearly wrong.
So, did everyone understand that? So again, these assumptions, or we're saying trip you up, basically, and this isn't just for relativity, this is for anything. When you assume something is true without verifying it and build on top of it, you're building a house of cards. I've also referred to them as kind of pyramids being built, where you're assuming all the bottom layers are correct without verifying them. I mean, House of Cards is a good example as well because it's very, very shaky. It might give the appearance from a distance that it's solid, but once you point out the issues, once you take out the cards that aren't valid on the bottom layer, what's going to happen? This isn't rocket science. This is very, very basic principles that even children can understand, and Run Z Cow has probably done the best job out of anybody I've ever seen in explaining it in super, super simple terms. And you know he understands everything to an incredibly high level. Again, this is an academic Olympiad gold medalist in 3 different fields. Or he's got 2 golds and a silver. So, biology, chemistry, and physics. You know, national winner in a whole bunch of different academic competitions. 99.9 percentile on some of the most difficult college exams ever. I mean, this guy knows his stuff, and that's actually why he's be able to explain it so simply. And what is the greatest irony in all of this? Another very, very popular Einstein quote: "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." So wait a second here. Does Run Z Cow understand Einstein's relativity better than Einstein himself? Because, again, as Run Z Cow laid out the history of relativity, and as most people familiar with relativity already know, like on the outset, they kind of made this, again, Emperor has no clothes, this kind of like, they're these posh physicists, and they're just the cream of the crop elitists. Only they understand relativity. And if you don't understand it, you can't prove it wrong. But wait a second. Who is at fault for them not understanding Einstein's theory? Because if they couldn't explain the theory simply, that means they didn't even understand their own theory of relativity well enough to explain it. And yet here we have Run Z Cow very, very simply explaining relativity. Let's continue.
Now, this is the observer inside the vehicle calculating how long he himself takes to travel from C to D. He clearly finds that he must take time 2t. So there is no time dilation here. There is no length contraction, there is no time dilation, there is no relativity. Now, let's look back at figure 4. We see now that our belief that clearly Einstein is wrong is very reasonable when we actually look at the diagram and think for more than however long Einstein thought about this, which was probably not very long.
I like this guy. This guy's kind of funny in his own way, but he's like a polite kind of funny.
Given that we've figured it out. So this is some of the other math that came out to VO prime equals 0.5c. We will scroll through this. So this observation from inside is equal to the speed observed from outside.
Again, if the equations are giving you trouble, don't worry about the exact equations. Just listen to his explanation of it. What's equal to what? What's relative to what? Just listen to the explanation. You don't need to focus on the math. If you do get the math, you can focus on the math too. But don't put all of your focus on the math. The reason I'm going over this is because Run Z Cow does such a great job of explaining the math with simple, easy to understand terms. So just focus on that for now.
Now, this says something very important for us. This says, of course, that if there is no time dilation and no length contraction, yes, distance over time is going to be equal to the other guy's measurement of distance over time, because neither distance nor time is stretched. Let's watch the animation again for fun. As we can see, the pulse emissions are at particular positions because position correlates to time, and therefore position can be used as a proxy for time. Whereas in Einstein's opinion, apparently this is not how reality works.
You know, it's funny too. If he decided not to question, he's clearly a very good teacher, because he is just really good at explaining things and breaking them down in easy to understand terms. Obviously, the establishment would love for him to just teach relativity, and he'd probably do a much better job teaching Einstein's relativity as if it were true if he didn't completely dismantle and disprove it. But it's just curious how this guy seems to have a better understanding of relativity than all of the zealots who religiously defend it.
All right, so we have already expounded upon why this discovery of 2T is very important. Now, what do we actually see? We also see that under these Newtonian mechanics, we are not constantly trying to punch ourselves in the face and force ourselves into conclusions that are clearly wrong.
Okay, he's a little bit less polite there for that joke, but that's actually a great explanation of modern physicists clinging desperately to relativity.
So we see that Newtonian mechanics are at least consistent.
And the other thing that is obviously very, very obvious, this guy's confident, and he can clearly elucidate his points quickly and succinctly. Versus, let's say, a goof like Neil deGrasse Tyson, or Bill Nye, the science guy. I know he's not even credentialed, but whatever. Neil deGrasse Tyson is a spokesperson. He is presumed by many to know what he is talking about. But you can tell in all his interviews and everything, he's just getting triggered. I mean, he's such a Dunning-Kruger goof. And, I mean, obviously, Run Zikow would mop the floor with Neil deGrasse Tyson in any kind of debate on anything. But just notice the way that Run Zikow speaks, gives his ideas, clear points, and very, very succinct. Whereas Neil deGrasse Tyson talks in circles, hallucinates, and just spews fallacy after fallacy and his blind faith in scientism, where Run Zikow actually breaks it down. He actually breaks it down. Why this? Why that? Giving clear specifics. Something Neil deGrasse Tyson and a lot of these other scientism goofs never do.
Einsteinian mechanics do not seem to even manage to do this. So, as a result, we must conclude that relativity is self-defeating and therefore not valid. And Newtonian mechanics seem to make more sense. So, perhaps we should consider taking another look at Newtonian mechanics and updating them suitably. For now, however, we've already proven that relativity is wrong, twice. I have more proofs that are coming from different angles. Alright, so we've already proven twice that Einstein is wrong, and now we will do it a third time. Mutual time dilation. Now, of course, we must study how Einstein got the erroneous result of time dilation in the first place. His obsession with this, this is a very basic diagram. His obsession with time dilation began with his insistence that the speed of light must be c.
And again, I just really, really like how simple and clearly he's making the points. He's clearly pointing out which assumptions Einstein made and hallucinated were true, and then built off of those assumptions, how this house of cards was built. And Run Zikow is clearly pointing out each layer of this house of cards. Again, I haven't seen anybody do it better than Run Zikow in simple, easy to understand terms. And again, regarding confidence level, a clear comparison to some of these other goofs like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Now, again, I don't know whether Neil deGrasse Tyson is that much of a narcissist. He just assumes he can't be mistaken about anything. That's if he's not a shill and knowingly lying about everything. But, or if his Dunning-Kruger is just so severe, he just can't consider the fact that he doesn't know what he thinks he knows, or he can't explain it very well. But his subconscious clearly demonstrates through his micro-expressions, through Neil deGrasse Tyson's micro-expressions, that he's not confident in his own ability to explain it. Even if he thinks it's true, he knows he's too dumb to explain it clearly and succinctly. That's why he has all these micro-expressions and he's always getting triggered, and these Dunning-Kruger stylings and faith-based, desperate faith-based grabs and logical fallacies is all Neil deGrasse Tyson has to prove his points. If you haven't checked out the Neil deGrasse Tyson logical analyses here on Mindshock, check them out, especially regarding the moon landings. I mean, it's just hilarious. He has zero valid logical arguments, and his micro-expressions are so hilarious because his subconscious recognizes that he's too dumb and his understanding is just not there to explain it. Whereas Runzi Cow here, he has no tells. He is so confident and clear in his presentation, even if he's wrong. Again, this is Mindshock. I'm not claiming anything is true or untrue. Maybe relativity is actually correct for a whole bunch of other reasons. And all of this can be, and this complete dismantling can be accounted for based on other factors. But since nobody has presented those other factors, I'm going to have to go with Runzi Cow here thus far.
In this diagram, this is kinematics. This is way before relativity in textbooks. So we clearly see that without a Vx, without a horizontal velocity, there is no parabola. Now, Einstein's problem was his insistence that this beam of light move at speed c in the external frame. So there is something a little bit wrong with this. Think about what it means once he derives this equation, which is that the time inside, so say 1 second has passed inside. On the outside, it's many, many seconds. So say it's 3 seconds. Well, alright, so what does it mean when 1 second inside is equal to 3 seconds outside? First of all, he fails his own first postulate, which is a postulate of relativity, which is that all inertial frames are equal.
You know what else is interesting? Again, the way that he's just making this so clear in very easy to understand terms. I mean, maybe that's why nobody wanted to touch this, rock the boat, whatever. I mean, how do you rebut something so basic, clear, and obvious? I mean, if it can be done, go ahead. Somebody do it. Put it in the comment section. But I mean, this is just so basic. Children can understand this.
Why? Because, well, we will very soon add another emitter. But we should note that for any postulate in science, there are two results. One is that it might be right, and the other one is that it is definitely wrong. For our first postulate, which is relativity, the postulate that all inertial frames are equal, there is no dispute. It must be right. Or as far as we know, it must be right.
I was about to say. He clarified himself there. Good job, Runzi Cow.
Therefore, we will demonstrate again that the constancy of speed of light must be wrong. So here we add another emitter, E. What does it do? Well, besides the tracks, we put two mirrors up. We shine this light up, and it comes back down. And the person outside is timing it, and gets the same time on his clock as the person inside for the light going straight up and down. This other light here that we add is progressing at speed c toward this mirror, and it is on a congruent path to light alpha inside. You might be wondering why I'm showing light alpha as having reached the end, whereas light beta has not even come close. We will show you why this is the case very soon. So this is a setup in words. And this is more setup. Yes, I know it is a little bit complicated, but think about the person inside looking out the window. Suppose that there are windows on this vehicle. All right, so the light that's being shone up and down outside. So the person inside takes a look at it, and it seems to be moving backwards. So here are some of the vehicles that we might use for thought. And given that supposedly they are so good with measurements these days that they can measure 4 kilometers of track flexing by the width of 1 proton, which by the way was the gravity wave thing that they talked about. If you can measure that, then you can definitely use trains to measure relativity. Well, the width they found, the difference from the gravity wave passing, was supposedly 1/1000th of a proton's width. So, of course you can use trains for relativity. Now, what happens when the situation is stationary? So the lights go up and they come straight back down. And they are the same time. There's no dispute. Right? I mean, I hope you are not going to disagree with me that they go up and they come straight back down. This is the same distance, 2d over c, same time.
I mean, how simple is this? Everybody's following, right? I mean, he breaks it down so simply. I mean, if you need to pause it, look at the screen, rewind it, listen to him say it again. I mean, this guy's clearly a very, very good teacher, and he gives very, very basic and clear explanations.
Now, if we use this reference emitter added to the setup, and the person outside still sees the light inside is going diagonally, sure. What happens when the person inside decides to look outside? Well, let's look at what happens with the reference emitter first. The person inside will measure the same time the light takes to go up and down as the person outside will take for the reference emitter. Now you might be thinking, why is this and this reaching the bottom again at the same time? It's because Einstein's assertion that this blue light here must travel at c is very wrong. Why is this? Consider the moving observer looking out the window. So this reference emitter, she sees that her light is going straight up and down, but the reference emitter's light seems to be going backwards as she moves forward. So, each observer will see the other observer's light moving diagonally. These path lengths will be the same. Why? Because d, and this displacement horizontally must be the same. So therefore, by Pythagorean theorem, this must hold true. By the way, before anybody decides to say that, oh, Einstein decided to use Riemann geometry, not Euclidean, in his general relativity, we must remind you that he derived his basic equations from Euclidean geometry, using Pythagorean theorem.
I mean, this guy knows his stuff. Again, you want to say he's wrong, that's fine. But to say that he doesn't have a very, very extensive understanding of the theory of relativity, the history of all of it, which equations were used how. I mean, this guy knows his stuff. If you want to call him wrong and debunk him, go ahead. The comments section is open, people.
Now, what happens when the light goes back down? This path is exactly the counterpart. It is exactly congruent to the path that is taken from the other perspective. So the person outside sees this light is going like this. The person inside sees the light essentially going backward. I do realize that technically it should be over there, but for sake of space and to show that the lights travel along congruent paths, we show them overlapping like this. What does this say? Let us not forget that according to the first postulate, which must be right, that no frame is more valid than any other frame, then all frames are created equal, and no frames are more equal than others. So, if one of my seconds is worth 3 of your seconds, and one of your seconds is apparently worth 3 of mine, as is the case according to Einstein, remember, this is only relative speed between the frames. So, the person inside observes that the person outside measures 3 seconds for each second they measure. The person outside observes the person inside measures 3 seconds for every second they measure. So, what is one of my seconds for me? It should be 1 of my seconds.
I mean, can it be possible to break this down? I mean, forget if the equations are too difficult for you. Forget about it and just listen to the words he's saying. Do people not see the problem with the assumptions, hallucinations, and unverified base layers of the house of cards that is relativity?
So, Einstein ends up giving us this. It's equal to 1 or negative 1. And if you still believe in Einstein at this point, that means you believe that either there is no time dilation, in which case Einstein is wrong, or that time flows exactly backward with respect to any other object. Why? Because this does not care about actual speeds. So mutual speed can be 0, and time would flow exactly backwards between any 2 given objects. The problem then is what happens when we add a third object. And the universe has, hopefully, your mental model of the universe has more than one object in it.
I mean, wow. I mean, that's a mic drop moment right there if there was ever any. But also, again, note the tone and delivery of this explanation here. This guy's not grasping at straws. This guy is giving very clear explanations with various scenarios. So, again, if someone believes he's wrong, feel free to debunk him and his points. But this guy really is something. He's actually used the modicum of logic and reason to actually hold the theory of relativity's feet to the proverbial fire and see if it holds up. Clearly, it does not. Unless there's something vast missing here, which there doesn't appear to be. This is children's level stuff.
So, that means Einstein is still wrong. Which means that clearly mutual time dilation destroys Einstein's entire theory. Now, let's consider this from a slightly different perspective. Mathematically speaking, the time that must be measured for the light to return to emitter level from within each frame themselves must be this, 2d over c. Since we've already destroyed time dilation, there is no time dilation here. Therefore, the light that's going diagonally according to the outside observer, but is actually going straight up and down according to the one inside the vehicle, that light must end up reaching the bottom at the same time as the reference light outside reaches the bottom. So, the time ends up all equaling 2d over c. And then, what happens then? Well, they can't observe time dilation, fine. So what happens when we add this beta light? The one that we saw earlier was still over here when the blue light had already reached the end, and when the red light has already come back to the bottom. We know, we are absolutely certain that light beta must propagate at C. So if light beta is propagating at C in the external frame, or with respect to the external frame, and we see clearly that it reaches the bottom after this light comes back, and this light comes back at the same time as this light comes back, what does that say? That says very clearly, according to all this math, that the speed must be greater. Well, here, the time for that light must be greater than the time for the other two lights. And therefore, what does it say for the speed of the blue light relative to the external frame? Well, here's some of the math. So the speed here must be this. We see very clearly that the blue light must have been traveling faster than the speed of the green light, which was c. So, by the fact that mutual time dilation is impossible, we have again disproven Einstein's speed of light postulate.
So that obviously was the most complicated example yet, and it could be difficult. You really have to imagine how it would play out in the distances of the light, etc., etc. But unless Run Zcow is a complete moron here and did the math wrong, but you can. I'm assuming most people can actually picture it in their head and understand just the basic idea of what Run Zcow is stating here relative to the claims of relativity and whether or not they hold up, which they clearly don't. Don't get lost in the minutia of the math. Just try to focus on the principles of what he's saying.
Because in the end, no frame is more equal than any other frame. And the animation that results looks like this. We see very clearly that by the time this finishes, the green light has not finished. These are congruent paths. Therefore, if the green light is moving at speed c and the blue light is faster, it must be faster than c.
Did everybody get that? I mean, the animation is just really, really helpful. Without that, if it was just a static image, that would be a little bit more difficult. But the animation clearly demonstrates the path. Now, obviously, doing this type of experiment in real time, in person, would be interesting as well. I mean, so it's not just abstract conceptualization, even though it's relevant. I mean, it's not the most complicated in the world, but the previous two examples, you don't have to do them. I mean, you can imagine them and pretty easily understand what's going on. I would be interesting to know, exactly how many experiments, how much documentation is there of actual experiments he's doing, or is he just theorizing all in his head?
This is not up for dispute. Now, this is a slightly longer wording of the same problem. All right. We have managed to disprove Einstein's relativity 3 times by 3 separate methods. Now let's take a look at how reality could work. So, Newtonian physics, at the very least, it does not contradict itself. Not as badly as Einstein's does. We've already proven that Einstein clearly just face plants so often.
How true that is. And that's also an interesting point too, just with Newtonian physics. Again, that doesn't mean it's true in any way, and I like his phrasing here because he's saying at least it doesn't contradict itself. So it might not be true. Obviously, you would need evidence if it is true. But the contradictions of relativity are, of course, very self-evident, as he just explained in children's level terms.
We will show a thought experiment that uses mostly Newtonian mechanics. And we will demonstrate why it is still reasonable, whereas Einstein is, well, not so reasonable. There are many more recent discoveries after Einstein's time. For example, black holes. The Schwarzschild radius can be calculated very easily by Newtonian mechanics. And it's still fully correct. So this says something, doesn't it? The problem was, after 1919, nobody wanted to be an idiot, or look like an idiot, by trying to go against Einstein. Now, in the common sense of science, to make an object move sideways, you must give it a horizontal velocity. And this horizontal velocity should not affect the vertical velocity. The only reason in many, many problems that students are forced to do on relativity that they must change the vertical velocity is because of this insistence that, oh, Einstein must be right.
Now, I mean, that's one of the best points he has made thus far. So all of the students, again, this guy was a student, not just any student. I mean, this guy's an academic Olympiad, double gold medalist, and also a silver medalist in 3 different fields, including physics. He also scored a 99, not just a 99th percentile, 99.9 percentile. And now he's an educator, instructor, and teacher himself. So he's well aware of both sides of learning, both learning and teaching relativity. Very unique perspective here, and he has more than 2 brain cells to rub together to actually question what he's being taught and indoctrinated with in these Ivy League indoctrination facilities. So he just made a great point where all of the students are forced to do the equations a certain way, hallucinating that Einstein must be right, and extrapolating and building upon the house of cards of fraud. Now, he's willing to actually do some actual critical thinking and say, wait a second. If this base layer of the house of cards is not true, then everything coming after it is also built on a faulty foundation and not true. He elucidated that extremely well just now. Let's give Runzi Cow his props.
Yes, of course. If you start off with the assumption that Einstein is right, you will get the conclusion that Einstein must be right.
The circular reasoning logical fallacy. Again, this guy is so good at breaking it all down to a children's level understanding. Is there anybody that didn't understand the concept that he just presented? Never mind getting into equations. I mean, he just laid that out in very simple, easy to understand terms.
This is not very complicated, is it? This reasoning. Well, it's not. The point is that we already observed several times from earlier that the speed of light pulse alpha must be equal to this. And by the common sense of science, it should be equal to this. And this is greater than the speed of light. So let's circle this, because it's important. Now, let's not use the mental shackle of Einstein's second postulate, because we've proven it to be wrong. And we see that, oh yes, we get a reasonable answer. Now, these are some of the calculations that we use under Newtonian mechanics, which are reasonable. None of these violate themselves. It is internally perfectly consistent. Under the common sense of science, these times should be the same. And as we saw earlier, reality should look like this. This is C. This is clearly C. But it's slower than that. So that is clearly faster than C. We should point out that experimental reality combined with good old-fashioned common sense, which, by the way, is a very bad misnomer because it is so rare. So reality is greater than relativity. It always has been, it always will be.
Great points there. And I'm going to go through a Nikola Tesla quote right now. And he's clearly talking about relativity and the proponents of relativity. Quote, "Today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality." Very, very powerful Nikola Tesla quote there, which is basically the exact same thing that Runzi Cow just illustrated there. Because if you don't have the experiments to back up the math, how much is the math worth? Again, you can count unicorns and multiply unicorns all you want. I mean, maybe the unicorns are true and they're real, but without proof of the unicorns, what good is the math? And Runzi Cow here, through his presentation, his easy to understand animations, clearly the experiments do not support the math of relativity. And of course, if you want to just go pure math, obviously, Oleg D. Jeffimenko is the way to go, but that's extremely dense.
The point is that Einstein's postulates, the first postulate is fine. The second postulate is strictly unnecessary, and it conflicts with itself in so many different ways that it is completely baseless. The unfortunate thing, though, is that for 110 years, nobody has actually managed to disprove it. Now, yes, Einstein based his second postulate on some reasonable experiments. The problem was that he didn't actually stop to think for a moment what happens when he applies the theory to reality.
Runzy Cow sounds kind of mad about it, too.
We will discuss some of the problems in a later presentation. Now, hopefully, I believe, at least, that all professional scientists who have watched this video will find it reasonable and find relativity to be less than reasonable. Now, it takes a lot of courage to stand up and shout that the emperor is naked, but we have done it. And hopefully you too will agree with us and shout that no, Einstein must be wrong. And thus physics will one day again have a real-time reference. Now, conclusion. Even other than the conclusions that we will draw, which will show that relativity has a ton of other logical holes. In point form, our thought experiments have demonstrated that Einstein's relativity is completely wrong. So, if it is completely wrong, clearly we must change to a slightly different form of physics. Newtonian mechanics, at least, is consistent. This is important. Einstein's are not. So relativity must be wrong. Now, I'm not saying that Newtonian mechanics must be right.
I mean, it's so eloquent there. Like, normally, typically, scientism cultists are always just hallucinating that this is proven, or all these experiments show, and going through all these reification fallacies. He's clearly, succinctly stating that Newtonian mechanics might also be wrong, as well as relativity. Just like, I mean, I always state that too about the electromagnetic theories. They could all be wrong as well. They just seem to work more consistently. So as people present new theories, those could of course be examined for validity, but clinging desperately to nonsensical faith-based models, I mean, clearly that's a big problem.
Because just because something is internally consistent doesn't mean that it is necessarily right. For example, you can assemble a model that places Earth at the center of the universe, and it would be fine according to relativity, or the principle of relativity, in that no frame is more valid than any other frame.
I would actually love to hear, I mean, I don't know if Runzy Cow's even thought about this. I would love to hear him discuss geocentrism versus heliocentrism and the proofs for heliocentrism that are non-fallacious. If he even has them, or if he did what he's accusing others of doing and just assuming it was correct, and he just assumed the heliocentric globe model was correct. Again, I'm not stating any model is or isn't correct, but it's just it would be interesting to hear his proofs, because I mean, this guy is such a smart guy.
However, that doesn't mean it's right. However, at least it wouldn't conflict with itself as Copernicus' initial theory did. Why? You might think, hey wait, isn't Copernicus the guy who proposed heliocentrism? Or in the modern era? Yeah, the problem was that he insisted on perfectly circular orbits, which Kepler later showed to be false. Now, my experiments demonstrate that the 110-year-old speed limit of the speed of light is not in fact a speed limit. Alright, so there are some other conclusions that we drew. First, there should be one time base in the universe, a universal time that has been counting since long before Earth existed and will continue to count long after Earth is gone. Now, if a person says that their perception can dictate time, how time passes in the universe, that person is probably, well, has some ego issues.
On point, Mr. Runzy Cow. On point.
Or thinks themselves really important. Under our above proofs, we conclude that Einstein's relativity is wrong. Alright, so the momentum of any object should resemble this equation. This includes speeds greater than or equal to the speed of light. And the kinetic energy should look something like this. It also includes speeds greater than or equal to the speed of light. The total energy should look something like this. Yes, Einstein's E equals mc squared is still reasonable.
Or is it? But that's a topic for another podcast.
This again includes speeds greater than or equal to the speed of light, because we have shown the speed of light is not a speed limit. Now, in addition to the speed of light in vacuum not being a speed limit, a limited speed of light is also unreasonable. Without this shackling, we can get an internally consistent worldview. Whereas Einstein's worldview, sure, it might look pretty on the surface, and it might be like, oh, we don't need to try any harder. We can just give up on surpassing the speed of light. Sure. But then when you look closer, it's internally inconsistent. It already trips itself up. It seems that Einstein installed a big red self-destruct button somewhere in his theory.
Another theory that I haven't really discussed extensively is if Einstein's relativity is obviously such a fraud, was it kind of like an inside joke, the same way some of this predictive programming and Illuminati symbolism is? Or like, you know, the serial killer calling the police station and making fun of them? Is this just making fun of the masses that they just went along with something so obviously bunk? And that all these institutions of so-called science are built on bunk and everybody's too dumb to re-examine it? Is that kind of like an inside joke of the elite? And that's why Einstein's always sticking his tongue out and laughing at everybody, because this is a total fraud joke and the whole world bought it, while the so-called Illuminati puppeteers are just laughing that everybody bought such ridiculous nonsense. Just a theory. Again, I'm not claiming that is true or untrue either.
Now, it'll of course be a great story in the future about Einstein and his respectable theories. Why? Because at least he had the guts to go out and propose them. We should point out that in Einstein's time, it was a time of great discoveries. 1900 to 1905, that was a time where physics, well, many physicists were starting to get a little bit complacent. So they felt like, oh, we know everything that it's worth knowing. Einstein shook them up. This was good. Another issue with that time period was that they essentially would allow anybody to publish anything that was mathematically reasonable. Einstein's theories were mathematically reasonable, given his postulates.
Given a whole bunch of assumptions and a stack of cards, and if you hallucinate the assumptions are true, then it is reasonable.
And his postulate, his second postulate about the speed of light, was based on several people's experiments to try to find the speed of light and whether or not the Earth's motion affected the speed of light. So they ended up concluding that light did not require a medium. It was a wave that didn't have a medium.
Okay, that's actually a huge issue. This is not the podcast for that. Obviously, he's talking about ether, the Michelson-Morley experiment, and then that's a whole nother load of assumptions. Same thing happened with relativity. Is Run Z Cal falling for the same thing he claims everybody else fell for regarding relativity? Very possible. He might have just assumed it and not re-examined it, whereas with relativity, for whatever reason, he didn't just assume and he actually re-examined. What would happen when a man of his intellect actually stops and re-examines ether, electromagnetism, Tesla, some of the other theories?
Now, Planck was awarded the Nobel Prize after Einstein published his papers, but Planck was still very famous. So this was a time when the wave-particle duality of light really was being an issue. So essentially it was a tumultuous time in physics, and anybody with something that was mathematically reasonable could hope to get it published. This is not like the modern day. In the modern day, you need to publish something that seems reasonable to the majority of scientists. And if they don't agree with you, they will stop you.
That's another great point by Run Z Cow. It's basically a popularity contest and a protection of the status quo. That's what the scientism cult is all about. So if the majority of people believe the wrong thing, this is why appeal to popularity and appeal to authority are logical fallacies, because the truth is whatever it is. The truth is the truth whether nobody believes it or everybody believes it. So, again, good on Run Z Cow for pointing that out.
So Einstein was lucky. He didn't need to resort to basically shouting from a soapbox, which we are doing right now. However, we should note that we have yet to achieve speeds over the speed of light. Now you might be thinking, hey wait, if the speed of light is not a speed limit, why is this the case?
I'm going to have to interject here because he hasn't even mentioned tachyons yet. Now, I don't want to derail the whole thing, this whole podcast and examination and logical analysis by going into a deep dive on tachyons. So tachyons, according to the official narrative, are theorized faster than light particles, theorized in 1967. Now, if you've checked out the podcast on the UFO conspiracy, where Terzinski, he's actually a guy that claims to have all this evidence that Germans engineered all these advanced UFOs and even went to the moon and Mars, manned missions to the moon and Mars in the 40s and 50s, well before the alleged landing by NASA. So he actually mentioned tachyon drives or particle accelerators and all of these things involved in the engine or propulsion systems of these UFOs. What's curious is because these documents are allegedly from the 40s, 30s, or 40s. The official narrative has them theorized in 1967. I mentioned this on the other podcast. How was the word tachyon translated that he was using it? Is it in these documents from the 40s and 30s? That would be interesting. And there are allegedly experiments that have clocked particles at faster than the speed of light. We're not going to get into that here, but again, at least the theory of them was, according to the official narrative, 1967. He doesn't even touch upon them. Not sure why, but I just wanted to note that. But let's continue.
If Einstein is wrong, why have we not seen speeds over the speed of light yet? In my other paper, or document, rather, I have described exactly why modern accelerators, by design, cannot hope to surpass the speed of light in their own frame. Now, in this article, I also outlined an accelerator design that can surpass the speed of light, provided it is not a speed limit. Given the fact that we have already observed Cherenkov radiation, which is from particles that are moving faster than the speed of light in their particular medium, well, we should be probably observing something reasonably similar when it comes to actually observing things that are over the speed of light.
Okay, so he actually sort of went there. So Cherenkov radiation actually does involve tachyons. I'm just going to read this super quick abstract from a paper on this. For those that are interested, it's doi.org/10.1007/BF027563327. Abstract, using the principles of duality and tachyonization, it is shown that a tachyon can emit Cherenkov radiation only in a superluminal medium, and namely when it happens to travel in the tachyonic medium with speed slower than the apparent speed of light in that medium. It is concluded that previous experimental searches for tachyons were expected to fail, since founded on the wrong hypotheses that tachyons would always emit electromagnetic Cherenkov radiation, even in vacuum or in bradyonic medium. And this was actually published March 1st, 1974. So this is all related. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole farther because this isn't really specifically about that, but at least Runzikow did touch upon it in some kind of way.
We should be able to observe them from beside their trajectory and in front. In front in the sense that they run into you. Now, this should seem obvious when given that relativity is incorrect. However, it seems that many scientists seem to have forgotten that, well, time doesn't wait. If relativity is incorrect, then of course there must be one time base in the universe. And what else must be true? It also means that the faster than light age should soon be upon us. And we said this is if relativity is incorrect. Well, we have proven it is. Therefore, hopefully, scientists will come to agree with me and save humanity by bringing us into a faster than light age.
Now, obviously, he doesn't seem to be aware of some of these other theories of Trzynski and others, but perhaps it has already been upon us.
As stated previously, we should note that to make mistakes in science is very normal, and it is of course very respectable. Why? Because at least you had the guts to go out and say something. Well, of course, if there is a mistake, then correcting it is also respectable. Let's make some, these are end notes that should really be noted about Einstein's whole theory. He essentially claimed that only the smartest scientists could understand him. This is the same trick as the emperor's new clothes. Now, he is actually right in saying that only a very few scientists could truly understand his theory. Why? Because this is saying that only very smart scientists can really understand him. And the thing is, any really smart scientist who, well, anyone who understands his theory at its very basis and does not immediately go, dude, this is wrong, is clearly not one of these few smart scientists. Emphasis on the smart.
This guy is kind of funny.
So, before watching this video, to believe in relativity is understandable. It is natural. Why? Because you are taught relativity. You have been taught relativity for the past 100 years. Well, I mean, people have been taught relativity for the past 100 years. So it is reasonable to believe in relativity before you watch this video. After you watch this video, if you continue to believe in relativity, well, it's your choice. But hopefully real scientists will no longer believe in relativity, at least as per taught by their predecessors. You should still believe in the principle of relativity though. Why? Because that first postulate is not up for dispute. Every inertial frame is equally valid. No frame is more valid than others. Now, of course, we should note that real scientists, even after watching this video, will probably still have to teach their students relativity for the simple reason that curricula do not change that fast.
Another excellent point there. No matter how wrong it is, or they understand that it's wrong, if you're part of the scientism cult establishment machine, you're going to teach the wrong thing, even if you know it's wrong. And that really exposes this religion.
So, while you're teaching your students this, make sure that you also enlighten them to the fact that relativity is wrong, and of course reference them to this video. As we know, it takes somebody very brave to stand up and shout, "The emperor is naked!" And of course, it takes somebody very brave to stand up and claim that relativity is wrong. I am the only one in 110 years to finally have proven that relativity is wrong.
Is that a little bit of an ego trip there, Runziko? I mean, obviously hundreds of scientists claimed that it was wrong. I don't know what kind of proof they presented. There's not a lot of that available anymore. Most of it's been scrubbed from history. Only a few references remain. But Jeffermenko, don't forget about Jeffermenko.
So thank you all for watching. And of course, thanks to Mr. Einstein for managing to give me the chance to prove that he is wrong, to correct his 110-year-old mistake. And thank you to all these references, and these as well. And our final claims that we must make today, that I must make today, are that 2015 should be noted as the year when Einsteinian relativity was finally overthrown. And 2016 should be the beginning of the faster than light age. If you are watching on YouTube, please look lower on the page to the description section of the video, and there you will find links to my two files. Namely, The Great Mistake Relativity, originally titled Reconsidering Relativity, and Surpassing the Speed of Light. There will be more videos to follow, outlining other glaring mistakes I found with relativity, and why I deem it worthy of the name Great Mistake. This video is brought to you by me, Ranza Cao. And this video also exemplifies how, and I believe the generation of physicists who are currently watching should know this reference. This is a case of the mountain crumbling because the pebbles dare to present themselves as tripping stones. Thank you for watching.
Okay, there you have it. Runzi Cow's presentation, which I have referenced many times in the past, and then we just went over it there. I'm actually going to go over one more thing just to thoroughly cement the dismantling and debunking of relativity. There also, I'll mention it now real quick before I forget. There was also a Greek website. There was a Greek physicist and mathematician. I can't find his website anymore. It was back in the day of GeoCities or maybe Tripod. It was a really old website, but it had really basic experiments you could do yourself to disprove relativity, also in easy to understand terms. I think it was both in Greek and English, so there was English descriptions there. It had both languages. If anybody listening actually remembers who this is, because I don't know, there's not that many people out there who are willing to stand against the religion of scientism and the Church of Relativity. And I'm not sure how many in Greece that actually had their own dedicated website to it back in the day. So I don't know when the website would have first started, but it would have been online around the early 2000s. So if anybody can find that, I don't remember the guy's name, but it was just, again, easy to understand, simple terms, no videos, just diagrams and explanations of experiments clearly demolishing relativity. So now we're going to go to the goofs that claim that LIGO discovered gravitational waves that somehow prove relativity. Let's address this common argument by the scientism cultists. So again, this is one for the coincidence theorists. Coincidentally, 100 years after Einstein's prediction in 2016, gravitational waves detected 100 years after Einstein's prediction at LIGO. So the alleged observation of gravitational waves from colliding black holes. Now everybody cites this and the existence of gravitational waves, etc., etc. What people don't know is that the data was injected. So, to the goofs that hallucinate that this is all conspiracy theory from crackpot websites, this is right on the official LIGO website at LIGO.org. The gullible goof scientism cultists, going straight to the source, they still disregard it because their cognitive dissonance is so extreme. Their mental weakness is so extreme because they view anything as blasphemy to exposing their religion as fraud. So you can go to www.ligo.org/news/blind-injection.php, and the full admission is here. Blind injection stress tests LIGO and Virgo's search for gravitational waves. The LIGO scientific collaboration and the Virgo collaboration completed an end-to-end system test of their detection capabilities at their recent joint collaboration meeting in Arcadia, California. Analysis of data from LIGO and Virgo's most recent observation run revealed evidence of the elusive signal from a neutron star spiraling into a black hole. The collaboration knew that the detection would be a blind injection, a fake signal added to the data without telling the analysts. Let me repeat that again for all the Dunning-Kruger goofs, coincidence theorists, and scientism cultists out there. The collaboration knew that the detection would be a blind injection, a fake signal added to the data without telling the analysts. So those that think and hallucinate and strawman that all the scientists would have to be in on it, it was all fake, obviously not. They self-admit that they don't tell the analysts. So the scientists are all happy and clapping and celebrating, yay, we discovered gravitational waves, when it was all fake. Now, how many times do they have to fake it and then everybody pretends, oh, well, this next time it was actually real? Now, you know what's weird? I mean, a fraudster who commits fraud so many times, are you gonna believe them when they say they're not committing fraud? Now, again, I'm not claiming that gravitational waves aren't real. I'm just saying, if they're admittedly doing blind injections regularly, why would anybody believe that a so-called real signal wasn't just a blind injection? I mean, how much of a clueless goof must one be to hallucinate that these people are trustworthy? And apparently they've done these blind injections multiple times. I'm not going to go through the entire article here. I already gave the URL. You can look at it here. Now, if that's not enough, let's look at further definitive proof of this fraud. Now, this is something else that I mentioned at least once in other videos. Theoria Apophysis, a very interesting YouTube channel. He actually talks about Jeff Amenko as well and the destruction of relativity, utter dismantling of relativity. He also has a very interesting video, again, where he's doing real science here. He's doing experiments you could do yourself with magnetism. So he addressed gravitational waves being discovered and the alleged equipment used to discover this and the alleged signal, which they get once and never again. Is it within the margin of error of not even detecting anything? Is it within the margin of error of faulty equipment? Now, the gullible goof scientism cultists, they won't even consider that. They think all of this scientific technology is completely infallible. So, but let's watch this video here because it is very, very interesting.
Okay, once again we have some idiot scientists seeking publicity for more funding so they can keep their jobs. It was announced today that the Laser Interferometry Gravitational Wave Observatory, of which there are 2 locations in the United States and 1 in Italy, which were used for triangulation. 1 is in Louisiana, 1 is in Washington. They're laser interferometers, and they're supposedly gave proof or validation to Einstein's gravitational waves. Well, they didn't. Let's actually take a look at something that you can demonstrate here on your tabletop. This is actually an example of laser interferometry. Now, before I actually get to the demonstration, let's duplicate binary objects, and I'm going to use a pair of magnets right here. Got North Pole here, South Pole here, North Pole here, South Pole there. Let's actually demonstrate that underneath the ferrocell, but let's first talk about what they actually did discover, and let's take a look at their claims. Okay, when they've stated that when a gravitational wave passes through the interferometry, the laser interferometer, well, this isn't the case. Space-time in the local area is altered. That's what they state. Well, that's BS. The EM phase shift retardation occurs. There's a magnitudinal measure, and space has no properties, nor does space alter any field modality. No proof for same exists. Likewise, Tesla and others have declared that space has no properties, and a field, of course, never has and ever could terminate in space. Space is not a terminal. They go on to state that depending on the source of the wave and its polarization, well, dielectric acceleration has absolutely no polarity. And they go on to state, well, the results in an effective change in the length of one or both of the cavities, the effective length of change between the beams will cause the light current in the cavity to become very slightly out of phase with the incoming light. Well, that's the key point there that they don't understand. The cavity will therefore periodically get very slightly out of resonance, and the beams which are tuned to destructive interference at the detector will have a very slight periodically variation of detuning. This results in a measurable signal. Well, this is a result you can see underneath any ferrocell, and it's a measurable signal. It's always it's a damn vortex, which is the same thing that they claim that they detected. So let's take a look at a pair of binary objects here in a second. Let's take a look at some pictures underneath the ferrocell of this EM phase shift retardation. Okay, here you can actually see the pointed patterns where we have a north pole of a magnet. Here we have a south pole. They're actually phase shifting towards a center point. Here you can see the same thing. We have either magnet. We actually have a null point vortex right here as they're actually spiraling. I'll show you that in a second using the ferrocell. So this is what they claim to have witnessed, but they don't understand. See, observations are one thing. Explanations are another. This is where everybody gets everything wrong. It's, well, we've made the observations and they're reproducible, and they did wait a good many months before they actually announced their observations, so I'll give them credit for that. But what they have explained certainly is not the case. the observations are not incorrect. It's only their BS explanations and comprehension of the simplex field theory. This is nothing other than this, and this is classical electromagnetic theory. This is electromagnetic retardation and theory of relativity, but this is not about theory of relativity. It's the proof that classical electromagnetic retardation disproves the theory of relativity. This guy, by the way, Dr. Oleg Dicefmenko, recently passed away. Multiple PhDs. He was a hardcore critic. This was a professor, endless math in this book, a hardcore critic of relativity. The proof that, for example, like GPS satellite correction has anything to do with proving relativity, he disproved that. He's written many books. There's another one by him, Gravitation and Co-Gravitation. He actually goes on to state that Oliver Heaviside accurately explained what gravity is in an appendix to one of his books, and certainly not Einstein. So the light phase vortex acceleration, the phase shifting, looking at EM phase retardation, is no different than that as seen underneath the ferrocell. And you can make a reference to this book. It's rather heavy. It'd make most people's brains explode. The entire fallacy of this discovery is that it uses the Fabry-Perot cavities, which of course proves my point entirely. It uses a beam reflector back and forth in these Fabry-Perot cavities to actually supposedly prove their claim. Well, their observations are correct, but the explanations are totally wrong. The light vortex due to the dielectric acceleration is no different than light passing over magnets in a ferrocell. You know, by the way, their observation is that there is a phase vortex actually occurring between these binary objects. Well, actually, they're not actually objects. They're null points in counter space. That which people call a black hole is a point where dielectric acceleration actually overcomes the possibility for manifestation. It's kind of like an absolute hole, except of course space is nothing. Space is the absence of inertia, and time is nothing other than a measure of magnitude. So what you're looking at is complete absence due to incredible dielectric acceleration. So anyway, these binary objects, I'm using the word objects in the vernacular here, so they didn't find any evidence of Einstein's spacetime, rather simplex dielectric acceleration. EM phase rarefactions and compressions, you know, space has no properties. Time is only a measure of magnitude, as I said. So they're only looking at high-order light capacitance phase EM retardation using the laser interferometer. So using a laser interferometer to actually measure high-order capacitance phase EM retardation. And they're saying, well, those are gravity waves. No, it's not. It's simplex dielectric acceleration. Phase cancellation is occurring when the dielectric acceleration is out of phase and amplified when in phase. This behavior is no different as that seen from light passed through a slit. Gravity does not exist as an autonomous field modality. It's simplex dielectric acceleration. These idiots are just seeking more public funding. You know, classical electromagnetic field theory explains the observations, a la Tesla and Maxwell, not the idiot Einstein and his warped brain, warped space-time nonsense. So let's take a look at something that these idiots spent countless millions of dollars creating, and let's actually mimic the exact same thing by using a binary object underneath the ferrocell. Let me turn the lights off, and let's place it underneath here, and let's wait for the image to develop. You can actually see that, you'll see this is a magnet here vertically, and one over here on the other side. Whoops, I flipped it there. There we go. Let's wait for the image to develop underneath the ferrocell. You see these egg shapes? This is a magnet here, this is a magnet over here. They're actually all coming to a null point at the center of the image here. They're all coming to a null point. If you actually look at the very, very center right here, you'll actually see a void. And this is, instead of, I'm using 4 poles here instead of 2, but this is the exact same thing. If you're actually to block out either pair of these on either side, block out this pair, block out that pair. This is the exact same thing that they report as having seen, and it's nothing other than simplex EM phase shift retardation. It's like, wow, that's just classical electromagnetic theory, a la Tesla, Faraday, Steinmetz, Oliver Heaviside, James Clerk Maxwell. It has no support and basis whatsoever to back up anything Einstein says. What you're actually seeing here, you know, white banding, dark banding, white banding, dark banding, this is also EM phase shift retardation. You know, Mother Nature's a really simple girl. She only works off 2 principles, and that is force of motion, inertia, and acceleration. And there are only 4 things to understand in the universe: resistance, capacitance, permeability, magnetic permeability, and dielectric permittivity. Now let's actually turn these magnets end on. Oh my God, look at that. It looks like a single magnet, but this is actually two. In other words, when you look at either pole like that, it looks exactly the same thing underneath the ferrocell as it does with one magnet. Oh, how shocking. That would be a proof of a Platonic incommensurability. But this is the exact same thing they report in their own video as seeing. You actually see a vortex of binary objects rotating around a point, a null point of maximum acceleration and inertia. Is this any proof of Einstein's gravity waves? No, it's simplex electromagnetic theory. It's very, very simplex electromagnetic theory. This doesn't prove Einstein at all. It actually, all it does is it reinforces Tesla, reinforces James Clerk Maxwell. You see, Einstein didn't invent a damn thing. And what little ideas he did have, he stole from Henri Poincaré and others. There's actually many books out there about that. This is just classical electromagnetic field theory that explains the observations of Tesla and Maxwell. See, they actually make these very keen statements that they don't, they make correct observations, but incorrect conclusions and incorrect explanations, which is a huge fallacy of science. Huge. You can observe anything and you can reproduce the results. And you can say, well, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. It's like, well, yeah, you've made a huge discovery there. Well, the explanation is there's a team of unicorns up there in the sky, and there's a sky god, and he pulls the sun from one side of the earth to the other. And, since I made the discovery, then therefore my explanation is also correct. No, it doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. So their observations are correct. But this is just simplex, high-order, light capacitance, phase EM retardation. Electromagnetic retardation. Oh my God, a very classical theory that belongs to Tesla, Faraday, Steinmetz, and Oliver Heaviside, and James Clerk Maxwell. Has nothing to do with gravity waves. Well, where's the math for electromagnetic retardation? Well, I suggest if you were interested in finding out about that, you could buy this nice book by Dr. Oleg Djafomenko, and you will understand everything if your head doesn't explode. Very, very simple. Gravitation and co-gravitation has nothing to do with gravity waves. We're talking about phase cancellation of dielectric acceleration of a binary object. Here we have a binary object causing phase cancellation as it's mutually going around a null point of maximum acceleration, or the center of gravity, if you will. Same thing as a hurricane. The eye of a hurricane, there's nothing there. Whereas the center of gravity, there's no gravity at the center of gravity. Oh no, well this is gravity waves. You see these light waves? Same thing here, except I'm using a quadrature instead of a polar. I mean, these idiots spent millions and millions of dollars and they want millions of more funding, which is why they made a huge press announcement. Because they want more money for more funding, because that will, pad their jobs for the next 20 years. And they're going to be looking for something that has already been explained 80 years ago by classical electromagnetic theory. Well, my God, let's reinvent the wheel and ask for a bunch of money for it. Actually, they revamped the laser interferometer over many years, so actually it's retroductive. What they're actually doing is justifying the cost of the upgrade that they've already spent many millions of dollars on, but also additionally to look for additional funding. So today's huge scientific announcement was nothing other than a pile of crap by a bunch of brainless scientists with more money and more gear than brains, looking for plenty of funding to keep their asses in work. Oh my God, what a timeless story of stupidity and ignorance and deception. Hooray! You discovered something that Tesla and James Clerk Maxwell already understood and wrote about decades ago. You're awesome. Not.
So again, what is real science based on? I mean, here we have empiricism. You can empirically verify these magnetic principles. So was this really simplex electromagnetic phase, rate of refraction, or retardation? Or was it the alleged gravity waves and these repeated injected data experiments and tests where they admit to the fraud of injecting the data without even telling the analysts who get this data, then they're all happy? I mean, this is almost emotional abuse here. I mean, you're tricking people into thinking that they've discovered these great proofs of physics and science and made these leaps in human knowledge when you're just faking them out. I mean, that's low, but typical for the scientism cult. So hopefully everybody found another edition of the Mindshock podcast and these logical analyses of physics and science versus scientism interesting and entertaining. Because it is funny laughing at these Dunning-Kruger goof scientism cultists who pretend their religion is actually science. It is quite hilarious, but even children, I mean, this is children's level stuff here. Even small children can understand this, and supposedly functional adults are just too utterly clueless to grasp these very simple concepts. If you enjoy the Mindshock podcast, you can donate to our PayPal, help support the Mindshock podcast, help us get more mind-shocking content out there with logic and reason at the forefront, bringing it back to a world where it is quickly becoming extinct. You can also become a YouTube subscriber right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you have your notifications enabled, and if you're still not getting notifications of the latest podcast, just make sure you comment a whole lot more on all the videos. That's how the YouTube algorithm works. Like and share, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You can also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.